From Brisbane, a new adaptive podcast player from the BBC. The latest from our daily newsletter at podnews.net. BBC Research and Development is launching an adaptive podcast player and a web editing tool for its adaptive podcasting project. The system allows your phone to choose different audio clips depending on each individual listener requirement and device sensor data in a privacy-preserving way. The app is available for Android now. The BBC's Ian Forrester will be on this week's Podland podcast later today to explain more. He was interviewed last week. Tony and Ryan, Spotify's big new signings in Australia, have just been confirmed for Podcast Day 24 in Sydney on October the 4th. They'll be interviewed by Spotify's Prithi Day, part of the global Podcast Day 24 event. We've a code for a discount in our show notes and our newsletter. Conan O'Brien is to get a channel on SiriusXM, according to the company's CEO. She was speaking at a Bank of America conference. Red Circle has improved its dynamic ad insertion tools with a new custom audio feature and audio blocks. She Podcasts Live has been moved from October to a new date in June 2023. The event will be in Washington, D.C. Amazon's AMP, a live radio-like experience, now has a web player which contains the 10 most popular shows, available in the US without logging in or downloading any app. Patreon, a membership and funding service used by many podcasters, has made its entire security team redundant. Albi has launched an analytics website for value, the podcast funding method from the Podcast Index. The website's called Saturn, and it gives a full view of payments made on the value system and interfaces with your Albi wallet. It's free to use and includes a live feed, much like Helipad. There's an interview with the team on the Podland podcast today. iOS 16 will be released on Monday. The new OS release for iPhone includes a number of updates to Apple Podcasts. Developers can submit their apps with support for iOS 16 features today, like the new support for a user agent in Apple Core Media. And one thing to spot, podcast images are much larger on the lock screen, including support for embedded chapter images. Podcast Movement posted an apology to Ben Shapiro after earlier apologising for Ben Shapiro's presence. The Brussels Court of Appeal has dismissed IAB Europe's appeal against a ruling that said the IAB's transparency and consent framework pop-ups were illegal under the GDPR. The case is to be referred to the European Court of Justice. An analyst's note suggests that podcast ad spend in the US will reach $6 billion by 2026. Daniel Day, who works for B. Riley, was interviewed in Hot Pod Insider. Following April's launch of PodX, a Swedish podcast investment company, Bloomberg's Ashley Carman has talked to the organisation to learn more. The latest version of audio plug-in software Isotope RX10 has been released, and Sky Pillsbury publishes a visual representation of what diversity looks like at the executive and deal-making level in big podcasting. Probably won't come as a surprise that there are a lot of white men. In People News, Pierre Nagar and Alex Forst have been hired as board advisors to AdTonos, an audio monetization company. Nagar was formerly at AdsWiz, Forst was at Spotify. Marielle Segara has been confirmed as the host of NPR's Life Kit podcast. Andy Tagle has been promoted to reporter-producer. And Steve Pratt has launched The Creativity Business, a business marketing and content strategy company. He was a co-founder of Pacific Content. And in podcasting news, a new episode of PodChat is out today. Tom Webster of Sounds Profitable joins Danny Brown, and they talk about being conservative around data, the tipping point for brands and podcasting, and how lack of education around ads is hurting both publishers and advertisers. And that's the latest from our newsletter. To read all the stories and subscribe, we're at podnews.net.